All right. Folks on Zoom, can you guys see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Yep, looks
So
good.
I'll go ahead, do a quick intro and some plugs, and then I'm going to hand it over to Chris, who's right next to me. So thank you guys for coming in person and on Zoom. This, if you didn't know already, is for the MaMA project. It's about rewilding ash trees. The project started in about 2017, and we're trying to get more proactive about it here in the Southern Tier. We'll get more into specifics of that in a second, but just wanted to shout out ERI, the Ecological Research Institute. They're the ones funding and sponsoring this program. Also Jonathan Rosenthal and Radka Wildova. They're the ones kind of spearheading the project, and they provided a lot of these materials for us today. The Nature Conservancy and the Forest associations, they also have some hands in this as well. But I'm Cam, if you don't know me already. I'm going to be going over the second part of the presentation where we actually go over the scope and goals of the project itself. But first, Chris Audette is the director of the Waterman Waterman Conservation Education Center. There we go. And he's going to be going over just what ash trees are, some of the important things about them, and why we should be caring about preserving the species. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Chris, and I'm going to go.
Thank you very much, Cam. Well, hello again, everybody, and hello, everybody in Zoom land. Thank you all for coming. So essentially, everybody here in this presentation, whether it be physically or virtually, we are all scientists right now. Congratulations. You've been commissioned. What this is all about is getting as many boots on the ground and eyes in the canopy as possible, to just amass basic data. Yeah. Where are our ash trees? You know, how many of them have been affected by emerald ash borer? In the room, why don't we just raise our hands, who is familiar with the emerald ash borer?
We lost the slides.
Yeah, I'm fixing it right now. We lost them in person, but I got it.
So how many of our ash trees are affected by emerald ash borer? How many of our trees are alive? Of those trees that are alive, you know, how are they doing? How full is their canopy? How full is their crown? So to be successful in this project, managing and monitoring ash, I'll pronounce it MaMA for the benefit of one of my later slides. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be an arborist. You don't have to be somebody trained in dendrology or tree identification. This is something that anybody can do, and leads to a really special result, which is hopefully going to be saving and rewilding the species. Actually, it's a 3-for-1, right, Cam? We have 3 species of ash in this region, so we could save 3 species. I will tell you. Funny you should ask. So to start at the basics, ash trees are deciduous trees, aka hardwoods. Am I blocking my slide? There we go. So hardwood, they lose their leaves in the winter. They all 3 species have beautiful yellowy orange foliage during the autumn, and they have compound leaves. I'll talk more about those compound leaves in the next slide, where I have photos that show them a lot better than this one. And the 3 species of ash that we have are all named after colors: white, green, and black ash. Ash trees are often the first to grow on a disturbed site, such as, say, old field that's not used anymore. As such, you relate that to New York State history, and it's not hard to come to the leap that about 95% of the land area in New York State at some point in the last 150 years ago, 150 years or so, was at one point an ideal place to grow ash trees. And we've seen that play out across the state, you know, on our own properties, at the state parks and nature preserves that we frequent. There's a lot of ash trees out there. Also generally, one of the first trees to leaf out in the spring and one of the first trees to turn and lose their leaves in the fall. All right, those compound leaves. Fail myself of the pointer here. There's the button. So this is all one leaf, and it's composed of leaflets. So we'll start with the green ash. So the little leaflets on each of the leaves are quite narrow. There may be 5 or 7 of them on each leaflet, or on each leaf. Flat leaf scars and diamond patterned bark. So you kind of have a crisscross pattern, especially as the tree gets older. Personally, I have a lot of trouble distinguishing green ash from white ash. In this case, more reliably, 7 leaflets on the leaf. The bud is a little more characteristic, where the leaf scar is deeply notched. If you do look carefully at the leaflets, you'll see that they're stalked. There's a little bit more of that stem connecting it to the main stem of the leaf. But also that diamond has cross-hatched furrowed bark.
It's the same as the other. It's different.
It is very, very similar. So
And the leaves are opposite, I mean, they're not staggered, right?
correct, opposite branching pattern
Yeah.
in general, yes. So I've been passing around my my portable ash tree there and trying to challenge people to tell me if that's a green ash or a white ash. Because with the available information, it's up for interpretation.
It's not very gross.
So the oddball here is the third species, black ash. Again, variable leaflets, but more leaflets on the leaf. No stalk whatsoever. Rounded leaf scars, but the bark is what's more distinctive on the black ash. It's more of a scaly, more reminiscent of almost a black cherry to me, without the flaky peeliness and the super dark color. Black ash generally is found most commonly in swampier or wetter areas. And a special thanks to Dr. Titus for putting together these figures for us. You guys can see there's not a whole lot of difference between the ash species. When the leaves are out, a lot easier. Winter ID, of course, is a lot harder. And we all are aware of the emerald ash borer. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the borer and its effects. This is one of the cooler photos of an adult that I've seen. You don't often get to see the wing covers lifted. But yeah, this beautiful like green fleck. It almost looks like an automotive finish. Gorgeous bugs. They just do a lot of damage. I've a picture of one of the larvae here. That's what's really doing the damage. So what they do is they infest ash trees, usually starting at the top, but eventually work their way all the way through. And they destroy the tree's vascular tissue. Kind of in the same way that a rabbit or a squirrel might destroy a tree that you were hoping to grow in your yard. They go all the way around the inside of the tree and girdle it, so it cannot transport any moisture or nutrients. Signs of infestation usually start with the presence of D-shaped exit holes. So I encourage everybody who's present after the presentation to examine that piece of bark and see for yourself how big those holes are. That very distinguishable D shape, and all of those galleries. Now the paths that the larvae chew through the cambium or the vascular tissue of the tree are usually S-shaped and 1/8 of an inch thick. And as the infestation progresses, you start seeing bark being chipped away as woodpeckers feed preferentially in that area, trying to get to those larvae. They chip away the outer bark, causing the lighter color underneath to show through. You may also see signs like epicormic branching, which is when it looks like the tree's trying to just start over a little further down the bowl. You'll see little leaves and branches sticking out from the main trunk, uncharacteristic to normal growth. Ash trees might die from other causes as well. Ash borer isn't the only thing killing ash trees in the world. It of course has diseases, fungi, and pests that are native. One example is ash yellows. But a lot of times a borer infestation will weaken a tree to such a point that ash yellows, which is usually not fatal to a tree, will be enough to do it in. Something important to remember is, as we talk about the framework for MaMA, the trees that we're documenting need to have some sign that there's ash borer present. Most typically those D-shaped exit holes or presence of galleries under the bark. So just reviewing some visual signs of borer infestation is the blonding, the galleries, those D-shaped exit holes. You can see it in relation to a pencil lead. They are not huge. In the field, it can be a challenge to spot these things, but once you know what you're looking for, they become pretty apparent. And then this is an example of an epicormic branch or an epicormic shoot. It's just the sign of a stressed tree. Now, I would not look at an epicormic branch and say, oh, that must be emerald ash borer. That could be a tree that has its feet wet. I would then go closer to that tree and look for the exit holes. So why do we care? We're of course facing the extinction of 3 species, but why would we care? Well, happy trees mean happy ecosystems. Nod, of course, to Bob Ross for the happy trees. Like I said, ash are an important early successional tree. If we're leaving it to natural regeneration, and let's nod our head to other barriers to natural regeneration in terms of deer pressure and invasive species, but assuming those aren't at play, ash are the first species that come in. They stabilize the soil and provide a favorable microclimate for our climax forest, maples and oaks to come in and slowly develop underneath that canopy. Ash provide important ecosystem services. They provide habitat for birds and insects and small mammals. They provide breeding habitat for woodpeckers and nuthatches and owls. Sorry, they do not provide breeding services for larger herbivores. However, browsing for larger herbivores, the younger shoots are certainly preferentially browsed by deer, though they browse everything these days. But I wanted to highlight the little seeds that ash trees make. They're very reminiscent of the little maple helicopters. It's just the ash trees are almost like sewing pin straight and very narrow. But just billions of these tiny little seeds. And they're such an important food source for small mammals and birds. That's a shame to see them on their way out. And for 2 weeks early in the spring, ash can be an important supplemental pollen source for bees. But you know, we are losing tree species at an alarming rate. I mean, we've lost the American chestnut. Efforts are underway to bring it back, but not present in the landscape. We have lost the elm. You know, we are losing the ash. Oak are at risk. Maple are at risk. There are so many things. Hemlocks.
Well, the pine trees too.
The pine weevil and oh yeah, the conifer drying
Yeah.
phenomenon.
Mhm.
Sorry, I'm visiting the chat here real quick. Yes, the recording will be shared. The emerald ash borer adult is not even a the width of a penny. They're teeny tiny beetles. And you know what? I'm going to have to look up vulnerability of mountain ash to the borer, but there we go. My suspicion was that it is not a true ash. So the ash we are talking about are in the Fraxinus genus. Anyway, enough with the depressing stuff. Here I go. There it is. They're good trees. They're useful trees. We can make stuff from them. So it's of critical importance to highlight the use of black ash by our indigenous cultures. The Haudenosaunee used black ash to weave baskets. This weaving and these pieces continue to be of importance to the Haudenosaunee. They are used in naming ceremonies. They're used in wedding ceremonies. So now this important material, along with sweetgrass, is in decline. A lot of times the baskets are made of a combination of woven sweetgrass and woven black ash bark. And both of them are unfortunately on their way out. White ash traditionally is the wood that we make baseball bats from. There are those who believe that the crack of a home run is sounds best when hit by a white ash baseball bat. I've not quantified that. Of personal interest, Fender guitars, usually the body have been made from one type of ash or another. So the guitar community is up in arms about, whether you have a fender made out of ash or not. It's also beautiful flooring. Paler floors are back in fashion, and ash is the perfect wood for that. Too bad it's becoming scarce. And then there's also thermostabilized wood products. Ash is a great candidate to be used for that type of product. It's very exciting. It eliminates the need for chemical treatment in terms of imbuing rot resistance for like pressure treated wood. So it's great for cladding and it's great for decking. So really there are a lot of commercial reasons why we should be trying to save ash as a genus at this point.
And the question, what should we do
Yes.
with all the trees that are already falling down?
We're going to talk about that later.
Well, they cut a lot all on my road.
It really depends. I mean, first and foremost is safety first. So if the tree is a hazard, of course it needs to be cut. But if we're going to be looking for ash that remain, we have to let some remain. And then on the landscape level, ash is an important tree. Going back to succession, ash trees stabilize soil. They play a role in nutrient cycling and carbon cycling. And of course in temperature stabilization, both through shade and through movement of water through the tree. Something called evapotranspiration provides planet-wide cooling services. Relatively rapid growth of the ash tree possibly has implications for how much carbon can be sequestered. And it's really one of our few native trees that can bully its way through honeysuckle and multiflora rose. I have an example here, a little hard on the screen to discern, but I have a young green ash just forcing its way through some bush honeysuckle right off our boardwalk. So it's a plucky little thing. I wish it well. So those are ash trees. That's why we care about them. As I'm sure a lot of us in the room and in the virtual space are landowners. We're worried about our properties as well. Some of us may be timber lot owners and worried about return on forested land. So we'll speak to all of that. But I wanted to make a quick plug for the next step after this informational session is that we'll be hosting a field session on Friday, May 28th. June 28th. I'm living in the past. What can I say? At the Waterman Interpretive Property at 403 Hilton Road. I think everybody will get an invitation who has attended. But for those of you who are not familiar, this is our lovely building. This is our lovely pervious parking lot and stormwater education system that I'll make an additional plug for everybody to visit and learn about. There's interpretive signage peppered all through the project. And this is a shining example of ash decline. That is our proposed site for a mortality monitoring plot where we can, in a hands-on way, get together, mark all of the trees, evaluate all the trees in that area, decide what's a good one to include in monitoring, and then get together and actually do some data collection so that you know what to expect when you're doing it out on your own. It's also a great chance to get together with people to team up and strengthen numbers and the more the merrier. We can make some MaMA teams to go out there and generate data. Yes.
The slide says May 28th as well.
Oh, that's why I'm living in the past. See, it's systemic.
What's that?
Is it bad that my inclination is put a Post-it up on the projector screen? That doesn't work. So everybody in Zoom, please take note. June 28th is the field day at the Waterman Center. I apologize.
You got black ash.
Not that I have personally located. I believe there's a pocket at the IBM Glen, but I couldn't tell you where. We're getting together with our community of naturalists to try to find a plot where we can include black ash. Now this photo of the plot area at the center is primarily green ash. So, why is your mama so important? We love her. Does a lot of good stuff, right? So to this point, the bulk of emerald ash borer mortality data centers around Western New York, the Finger Lakes, Ithaca, and the Hudson Valley. There are a lot of gaps, and specifically right around where we are, there's just not a lot of data. So even just documenting the presence of EAB infested ash trees, documenting whatever the stage of decline is going to be very useful for this project, because we have to know what we're dealing with before we can start looking for resistant ash. The exciting part that Cam's about to get into, and talk about, you know, where the rubber meets the road in terms of beating this bug. It's hard to discern, but there are little yellow stars on this map. There are little yellow dots. They represent established monitoring plots. And you'll see that there are no actual dots in our red circle. So we're about to change that, and you're in on the ground floor. So let's all work together. Let's fill in the gap at any level of detail that you can, and we'll do what we can, right? So with that, I'm gonna hand things over to Cam to talk about the nuts and bolts and the mechanics of what this means.
All right, so thank you, Chris, for going over why we should be caring. And now I'm going to go over what the actual scope of this project is, how it works, and the roles that we can play as citizen scientists. So first off, I'm going to be saying the term lingering ash, or LA, a lot, so I want to establish what that means. So a lingering ash is a mature, which means a DBH of greater than 4 inches, DBH meaning the diameter at breast height. So any mature ash tree that is naturally occurring, that has not been chemically treated, and stays healthy after 95% of these surrounding ash trees have died due to the emerald ash borer. I'll talk more about the timelines and things like that, but that 95% mortality is really, really important. And the tree must be mature and healthy. Healthy means it still maintains a full crown of leaves through the months of June through September. And then some doctors that originally started doing this project in 2017, they actually discovered that you can collect something called scion from these lingering ash trees. They're basically just twigs that you cut from those lingering ashes. And then you could use those for a selective crossbreeding program that actually yields resistant ash trees. And I'll explain more about that in the next couple of slides. But they take these scion with the twigs and they graft them onto rootstock. And there's a few benefits for that I'll also go over in a few minutes. So just taking a look at kind of what that propagation looks like. So lingering ash scion from Ohio and Michigan were the first ones that they collected, and they grafted it onto rootstock. That basically allows for rapid clonal propagation because as far as the tree is concerned, it is mature already. If anyone has ever grafted fruit trees, it's kind of similar. If you take a branch from a mature tree, that branch will start fruiting right away. Same thing, same concept here with the ash trees that we're thinking about. When you crossbreed these naturally resistant trees back to one another, the offspring, especially once you get to that second generation of crossbreeding, are way more naturally resistant. And I'll go over it in a few slides, but there's multi-layered resistance going on. So individual trees are resistant in different ways. Some of them might be resistant by scarring over the larva inside of the tree, preventing them from actually eating that vascular tissue. Some of them might actually have natural chemical defenses. So by crossbreeding them back to one another, the resulting generations have those layered impacts that keep them further protected. So here's a picture actually of one of those crossbred twigs for my friends here in person, right there, that little blue circle. That actually is an ash borer larva that tree has successfully scarred over and stopped it from continuing its progression and killing the tree. And then the chemical defenses can vary. I don't know too much about them, but all that's important is that they do have those defenses, and those offspring can maintain both physical and chemical defenses they get from both of their parents. So taking a look at some figures, I'll explain what the colors that we're looking at are. The orange is going to be eggs or newly hatched larvae were killed by the resistant tree. The green is going to be larvae died in early stages. We call it instar stages with our insects, so that first and second instar. And then blue are going to be the larvae that actually make it all the way to adulthood. So these are going to be, these are results that were taken from our green ashes. And as you can see, not all of them are 100% resistant. That's why this crossbreeding program is so important, because eventually even the naturally resistant trees will succumb to the ash borer. So that's why timing is so key with the type of data collection that we're going to be talking about in just a second. So this is just showing kind of how that crossbreeding works. So at the top, you actually have two of those lingering ash parents that were crossbred to one another using those scion cuttings. That first generation, not all of them are going to be resistant. In fact, some of them aren't resistant at all. But then there are a very select few that maintain that resistance, and you take those and then crossbreed them to one another. And then from their subsequent offspring, there is that small percentage in that like majority orange circle that we have going on the bottom. Those are the ones that we're going to be selecting for. So it's a really intensive crossbreeding project, because then you have to vet through the offspring to choose those to be crossbred back to one another. But those are the ones that actually are going to be used for the crossbreeding project and have that natural resistance. The reason that I think this project is so cool is because all of the resulting trees have local genetics. The parents that they were pulled from are adapted to our native environment. When you're thinking about some of the other rewilding programs for the chestnuts and the elms, a lot of that has to do with genetic modification, bringing in genomes from the non-native trees. These are all local genetics. We're not pulling anything out. It's just crossbreeding of trees that already exist here in our forests. So a lot of people will also say there are other resistance measures. There's parasitoid wasps that are used as a biocontrol. So what the wasp does is it actually finds the larva of the beetle, and it lays an egg, and then the larva of the wasp actually eats the larva of the beetle. And while this does slow down the infestation rate, it's not going to save the trees completely. This is shown by some North American species that are in Asia, and they still are succumbing to that ash borer. So it's not just like enough to have that biocontrol. You still need the program to produce those resistant trees. So thinking about using the scion for these resistance breeding programs and advantages over taking seeds, like I was talking about before, kind of like with the fruit trees, we can start crossbreeding them a lot quicker instead of using seeds. The seeds from the lingering ash also only have genetics from one of the parents that is lingering. So by crossbreeding ones that we know are already lingering, we're kind of skipping that step. And the grafting from the scion, like I said before, it rapidly produces those mature trees that we can then use for the breeding, because it takes a few breeding cycles to produce the resistant trees that we're looking for. So looking for these locally adapted lingering ash is no easy task. We have a lot of forested land that I will pull that map up in a second that we have not looked at least in the context of the project. And we need everyone that wants to partake to be partaking in it. And like Chris mentioned before, you do not need to be a scientist to do this. You just need to know how to identify the ash trees and the signs of the emerald ash borer. And then you can actually collect data. There's a few different ways that you can do that. And there's also a few different ways you can submit the data that, again, I'll go over in a few minutes. But anyone from a concerned citizen, landowners, naturalists, people that manage natural land like state parks, anyone can get involved in this project, which is also why it's such a cool opportunity. So there's two main goals of this MaMA project that ERI has outlined for us. The first one is widespread data collection that will enable that detection of those lingering ashes. So getting out into the field, looking for stands of ash trees that are being impacted by the ash borer. And then once those have been identified, kind of turns into a waiting game, waiting for that 95% mortality to hit, and then you can go out and start looking for lingering ashes. The other goal is integrating lingering ash detection into the management of emerald ash borer and ash trees. There's a lot of different approaches to management strategies. A lot of it depends on the goals you have for the land that you're managing. I'll go over that at the end, but keeping that detection of lingering ashes as a part of the management strategy is another big goal here. Someone mentioned just cutting them down. That has been commonplace more recently. That isn't a bad way to manage this problem. But again, if we cut down all of the ash trees, then we're not going to know if any of them are lingering that can be used. Yeah.
I'm thinking of the question. The lingering ash, are you anticipating that there will be 5%? If we do nothing?
So the 95% mortality, the reason that's so important, there's a slide on it in a few minutes, but if you don't wait for a 95% mortality, a tree can get misidentified as lingering. But if you wait too long, even the lingering ash trees will eventually succumb to the ash borer. So you need to wait enough time for the invasion to progress enough to the point where we can actually correctly identify the ash as a lingering ash. But if we let too much time pass, then even the lingering ones will die.
And this science and grafting onto an ash tree, or
Yeah, so it's taking twigs from the lingering ashes and then grafting it onto root balls, basically, of ash trees. And as the citizen scientists, our job is just identifying these stands of trees and these lingering ashes. Folks that actually work with the MaMA project and for ERI go out and do the collection and all of that. And I'll go over what that looks like just so you guys know.
95%. My neighborhood is just decimated.
Okay.
How do I know if it's at 95?
So 95% mortality, the base number that you want to shoot for is roughly 40 trees in a plot. So you have a large enough sample size. And then once 95% of those trees have died because of emerald ash borer, that's when you know it's reached. Chris and I, when we were talking about this, we were like sure that it was already 95% mortality, even at Waterman. And when we were in a meeting with Jonathan, he said that's pretty like common. A lot of people have that assumption, but then you go out in the field and actually start doing the assessments and it's more like 50 are dead. Because even if they're sick, that still is an alive tree. So you need to wait for all of them to be actually dead before you say 95% has been reached.
And you're
Yeah.
only counting the ones with the diameter greater than 4?
Yes, they need to be those mature trees with a diameter greater than 4 inches, which actually is pretty small to be considered mature. Normally, I associate 10 inches with a mature tree, but for the purposes of the project, a mature ash tree is anything with a DBH greater than 4 inches. So just in the recent years, we've already identified, I say we, people, citizen scientists, just like you guys, have already identified 110 of these lingering ash trees from the Hudson Valley, the Catskills, and the Finger Lakes. There's pictures of lingering white, black, and green ash. If we find lingering black ashes, that's really exciting. They're not as common, and they seem to be the most heavily hit out of the 3 species by the ash borer. And cuttings, those scion cuttings were actually taken from these trees last year, and now they're up at Cornell actively being used for the crossbreeding project. Cornell's botanical gardens are the ones kind of managing the crossbreeding.
What we do in the short term could end up being bred at Cornell.
Yes, like even you could find the lingering ash tree that Cornell is then using. That's why this is such an awesome citizen science opportunity. A lot of the times when we talk about citizen science, it's kind of like, well, where is this data going? What is it being used for? This project, you actually know where it's going. Like you can, that specific tree that you found is the one they're going to come to. So some of our ash trees, even the lingering ashes, they can show some battle scars from dealing with the EAB. A lot of that is going to look like built up of scar tissue. So even these lingering ashes are going to show signs of the infestation, but what we're looking for is that healthy crown through the months of June and September, after 95% mortality has been reached. So here's some pictures of the scion collection from all 3 species. I believe these were from last year. So this project, we're in the throes of it. And ideally, most of New York State will become involved, and then our neighboring states here in the Northeast, even up in Canada, will get involved as well. But we're really focusing here on the southern tier at home. These are up at Cornell's Botanical Gardens. These are the scion grafts. You can see they're already growing pretty well. And these are the ones that are going to be crossbred to one another, and then those resistant offspring will be identified. And then the long-term goal here is obviously rewilding the ash trees back into the forest. We're still pretty far off from that, but there is proof of concept. This is working. We are producing resistant trees. So MaMA has a few different data projects that you can use to identify these trees. I'm going to review some of them in a second. Some of them are much more of a commitment than others. So it really is a kind of internal question that you need to ask. How much commitment do you want to make to this project? Some of them can take as little time as 15 minutes. And then some of these projects are year-long commitments, not just year-long, several years you're going to be committing to this. Like those demonstration plots. If you're setting a plot up, you need to commit to not cutting any of those trees down and monitoring them annually. And Waterman is a great place for that. So we'll be doing that, and I'll talk more about that at the end. But the timing is, I kind of touched on before, super important here. If we do not wait for 95% mortality to be reached, you can misidentify a lingering ash. So they're going to be taking cuttings of an ash tree that does not have natural resistance. Then if you wait too long, the resistant trees will end up dying. Thinking back to the figure I showed you a couple of slides ago, none of the lingering ash trees are 100% resistant. It's the crossbred offspring that have that 100% resistance, or near 100% resistance. So taking a look at some of MaMA's action maps, these are based on data from MaMA surveys that have already happened. There's also some other sources like iNaturalist that populated in these maps. But as Chris mentioned before, there's a lot of gaps here in the southern tier. I'm going to go to the next slide so you can see it better. But looking at what the colors mean here, so where there is not any color, kind of like that yellowy beige, that means there has been no surveying, no data collected. So we don't really know what's going on there. The blue areas are early infestation. The green areas are infestation has progressed. You might have 95% mortality, but not quite yet. And then those red areas, infestation has progressed, 95% mortality has been reached. That's when you want to start looking for those lingering ashes. I'll go over more specifics on individual slides coming up, but I just wanted to point out what those colors mean. So thinking about the data collection projects themselves, all of them are housed on software called Anecdata. You can access it on a computer. You can also access it on smartphones if you want to use it out in the field. That's what I recommend is the easiest. I have it pulled up so I can show you guys once we're done with the slides. You can submit data through the smartphones, computers, via email, or you can do a standard letter and submit data that way as well. And then monitoringash.org, which I will also show you guys when the slides are done, has a bunch of training materials and principal forms. I highly encourage anyone who wants to become active in this project to attend that June 28th session. Chris and I are going to be going over all of the projects in person, much more in depth than I will be today. So if you want to learn how to use the actual software, highly encourage attending that session. The 4 projects that you can find on Anecdata are the MaMA ash and emerald ash borer surveys, the monitoring plot network, the MaMA-RAMA, which is the rapid ash mortality assessment. I know, good name there, right? And then the MaMA lingering ash search. I'll go over all those more specifically right now. So the MaMA ash and EAB surveys, this is when you go out and you record the presence or absence of that emerald ash borer. And if it's present, you're also going to be recording if trees are dead. You can do this in any area where EAB has not been reported. So thinking about the map, anywhere where there weren't colors laid over it, that's where you want to do these surveys. Because if we know that emerald ash borers are there, then we know we should be looking for those lingering ash trees, or at least returning to look for them once mortality has been reached.
You have a map that
show more specifically where it's been worked, just that general green, blue?
So when you go in the actual project, you can zoom in and it gets much more specific. I can show you that on the website at the end. But the big map is kind of like a general idea of where we're missing that data. So this can take as little as 15 minutes. It can be done any time of year. In the winter, it's going to be a bit more tricky to tell if the tree is dead or not. But you can still tell if the emerald ash borer is present or not. And the knowledge you need for this is just the ability to tell an ash tree apart from other trees. You do not need to know the difference between the 3 species. You just need to know that you are looking at an ash tree. And you also need to have the ability to identify the presence of the ash borer, which are going to be those D-shaped exit holes, those S-shaped galleries, and some of that blonding, where the woodpeckers are actually going in and peeling some of the bark back.
If you have one of the beetles.
Do you have a beetle in the freezer? Colleen, I'm jealous. I've only seen the beetle once. Sorry, I have one of a local moth and butterfly expert sitting here in person. And if you are crazy like her and I, you keep bugs in your freezer to pin. But moving on, the next project is the monitoring plots network. This is the most time intensive. This is the biggest commitment. This is really good for private landowners that have the ability to commit to a monitoring plot. Or if you are a manager of otherwise privately owned land, like Chris is at Waterman, where you can set aside that land. The big thing here is once you set up a monitoring plot, you can't touch any of the trees. You can't cut them down. You need them to stay so we know when that 95% mortality has been reached. And also if you're going around clear cutting, you could be clear cutting a lingering ash. But again, not here to judge if that's the management strategy you take. That's do what's best for your land. Any ash tree, yeah.
Oh,
So for the monitoring plots network, you tag, record EAB evidence. Well, let me start over. When you're setting up a monitoring plot, you want at least 40 of those mature trees, those ash trees with a DBH of greater than 4 inches. And the data that you're going to be collecting is evidence of EAB, the health of the crown. So what do the leaves look like through those months of June through September? And you want to make sure that they are naturally occurring ash. So things like street trees that are planted there, we don't really want to be including in these assessments. We want naturally occurring trees, and they cannot be chemically treated. It's okay if a biocontrol has been implemented, but no chemical treatments can be used for those monitoring plot networks. You can do this everywhere. Even if EAB is not yet present, you can still set up a monitoring network. It's a safe assumption that if it's not there yet, it will go there. Once an invasive species gets itself established, it's almost impossible to get rid of it entirely. The time needed, like I said, this is going to be a more time-intensive project. Initial setup and data collection can take upwards of a few hours. On the June 28th event that we're doing, we're actually going to be setting up the monitoring plot. So you guys are going to be helping us do that if you choose to come. And then you can also get some experience doing it should you want to do it at your own property or somewhere else that you know that you have permission to. Yeah, we're going to go over ID in the field, how to measure DBH, looking at those signs of EAB. We're also going to be going over the software that you're going to be using on your phones or on your computer or out there as well. And then you want to do this June through September because you want to be able to see if the crown is healthy or not and make those accurate assessments. And the knowledge needed there, similarly, you need to be able to recognize an ash species from other tree species and evidence of EAB, and then also the ability to measure DBH. It's not hard. You just wrap a measuring tape around the tree and record how big it is. It's not that complicated. I believe in you guys. So the next one, this is the MaMA. This one is probably the most common that people are going to do. You don't need to be doing this on your own land. You could literally be on a hike through the woods and do a MaMA while you're on your way. This is a one-time assessment. The big thing here is you want to have around 40 naturally occurring ash trees. 40, there is some leeway there. If it's like 35, that's fine, but you don't want to be going too much, you don't want to be going smaller than 40. Sorry, I don't know why my words got confused there. Because then your sample size isn't big enough. You don't need to do any tagging, but you are going to be collecting data otherwise, like we talked about previously. You're going to be doing these MaMA where the emerald ash borer is found, especially if mortality is unknown but likely high. So those places like Colleen was asking about, you think there's high mortality, but you don't know if it's exactly 95%. That's an awesome place to go into a MaMA. You can do this in about an hour. You can do longer if you want to do more trees, but this one isn't a big time commitment. And again, June through September, you want the trees to be leafed out. And same thing, you need to be able to tell an ash apart from other tree species, evidence of EAB and the DBH measure. So the very last one is the lingering ash search. This is where you're actually going out and looking for those lingering ash trees. You cannot do this until you know 95% mortality has been reached. Yes, so this is going to be it doesn't need to be a plot that you establish. If you go on the project websites and you find an area that has been like delineated as 95% mortality, you can go out and start looking for lingering ashes. But the big thing is that you know that 95% mortality has been reached. And again, that's 40 mature ash trees. 95% of them have died because of emerald ash borer. You can do this anywhere you know that mortality is. It says 100% here, but obviously if 100% happened, even the lingering ashes died. So we're thinking about 95 there. You can do this in as little as half an hour. This is super visual. This is probably the easiest one to do because you're looking for the ash trees that aren't dead. And again, June through September, a healthy tree needs to have a full crown. If 95% mortality has been reached and the crown is not fully healthy, that could just be a straggler that maybe the infestation started a little bit later. And then again, same thing, you need to be able to recognize an ash, signs of EAB, and the ability to measure or estimate DBH. When you're setting up a monitoring plot or you're out doing a MaMA or a lingering ash search, you don't need to measure every tree. Once you've done it enough times, it's pretty easy to tell if one's bigger than 4 inches or not. So taking a look one more time at this map, the red circle that Chris overlaid is our area. And as you can see, there is a lot of places that have not been surveyed yet. A lot of the big reason is because a lot of our forested land is privately owned. So if the landowner is not doing the assessments themselves or having people come out, then we just don't know what's going on that land. That's why, especially if you're a landowner, you know other landowners, this is a really important project. If you know other people that own land that maybe don't care as much, but maybe aren't as interested in becoming part of the project, if they're willing to let other people come out and do surveys on their land, that even works.
Where are my NIFOA people?
You're
I have to have at least a few of you in here.
What?
Yes.
NIFOA, it's the New York Forest Owner Association. So if you are in NIFOA, or if you know other landowners that maybe don't want to do it themselves, there are people look around the room that are passionate about this project and maybe are willing to come out and do some surveys on their land. As far as we are aware, according to the data, nowhere in our area is yet at 95% mortality, but I suspect we are approaching it, or we just don't know those places yet. So that's why it's really, really important to get out in the southern tier, because if we wait too long, the lingering ashes are going to succumb to the ash borer eventually.
There's certainly the chance that you'll go out and set up a plot and be, oh, okay, 95. It's really easy to assume that, and we have to guard against it.
Yeah.
And then that 95 is all that bigger tree, it's not little shoots.
Yeah, it needs to have the DBH of at least 4 inches, which isn't as big as you would think. It's I mean, I'm not going to try to estimate it, but it's smaller than I thought it would be. But anyway, thinking about managing ash trees. So I mentioned before that second goal was incorporating the lingering ash search into the management strategies. But there are other management strategies that are going on. We talked about going in and cutting the ash trees down, the release of biocontrols. But here are some ways to help you think about it if you don't really know what to do with the ashes on your property. So first and foremost, if the dead or dying trees are a safety hazard, if they're close to a trail, close to your home, close to a road or a structure, cut it down. Safety is your first priority here. If cutting is necessary to maintain habitat, cut it down, although that's super rare. If anything, the dying trees are important habitat themselves. Things like woodpeckers are going after a lot of the insects that are going to be decomposing that wood. It's important nesting space for a lot of the birds that Chris mentioned. So dead trees are still important. I know they might not look the best, but animals and fungi and even other plants are still using those trees. And if you want to harvest the dead or dying trees for resources like Chris mentioned, that's another good, completely valid reason to cut them. You want to start considering some treatment options if the tree has a special role in the landscape or if treatment is practical and affordable. We're getting to a point in infestation where I don't know how practical or affordable treatment is, but again, something to consider. And
It's getting harder to inject trees.
What do you inject them with?
pesticides basically that kill the insects. But treatment, there's a lot of things to consider there. It's a good option. Hemlocks, treatment's working really, really well against the hemlock woolly adelgid. As far as I'm aware, there's not many chemical treatments for ash trees. At least ones that target the ash borer specifically.
There are soil drenches.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's also a midfloprid. But you know, the drenches are inefficient. You can actually inject the tree and use pressurized tubing to force systemic insecticides into the tree, but you still need intact candium to move it. And your chances of hitting intact candium are getting slimmer and slimmer on any given tree these days. So most of the time, it's neither worth the trouble nor the expense.
Yeah, but if you think it's a viable option for you, that's totally fine. And then the monitoring plots and lingering ash detection. If the trees do not need to be cut or treated, and if it's not a cultivar, which means you didn't plant it there yourself, it needs to be one of our native naturally occurring ash trees, then if possible, leave it be, and then you be incorporated into this lingering ash search. I mean, I'm gonna encourage everyone to do that, but obviously, make the decision that feels right for you and whatever land you're considering. So what can you do? Try to leave mature ash trees uncut and untreated if possible. All healthy ash that get cut proactively, we can't use in our search, which is why it's important to not cut them down if that is an option that's viable for you.
It's really hard to put it back up.
Yeah, once you cut it down, it's gone. So if you have a nice big stand of ash trees, especially hitting that 40 or more number, a monitoring plot is a great way to go. But again, that is the longest time commitment, so understandable if that's too much of a commitment. But you can't cut them until they are dead. Once the tree has died, you know it's dead, that data is recorded, that's okay. And you want to try to leave enough healthy trees, because that will increase your chances of finding a lingering ash. So when you're going and blindly cutting all ash trees, even before they are dead, you might be removing some of those possible lingering ash trees without even knowing it. So for more information, come to the training workshop that we're doing on the 28th. I highly recommend coming if you want to get involved in this project. Today we wanted to keep it pretty broad and informational, but we're really going to be getting in the field, getting our feet wet, going over those identification signs for ash species and the emerald ash borer, and going over the software much more in depth. You could also visit the MaMA website, monitoringash.org. And if you have any questions that neither me or Chris can answer today, you're more than welcome to email Jonathan or Radka. I'll put this slide back on when I'm done if you guys want to write it down. But I did just want to go over what the websites look like really quickly. People on Zoom, can you see that? All right, I'm hearing now, so I'm gonna see.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So this is what Anecdata looks like. So you just make an account, you just provide an email. And then when you want to look for the projects, you just search MaMA in the search bar up here. I've already added it to my project list. So when I go to my projects, you can find all 4 of them here. And then in here is where you're going to be recording that data. So let's say I just did a lingering ash search and I want to make a new observation. You just press new observation, you fill out the form and you submit it. We're going to be going over the specifics of this when we are establishing our monitoring plot. So again, highly encourage coming if possible. And then this is just what the MaMA website looks like. There's a lot of really awesome information here. I also have recorded the Zoom meeting, so I'll be posting that and emailing it out to everyone for personal records. And Jonathan and Radka are also working to update the training sheets. And once they've updated those, I will also send those out to everyone. But the biggest suggestion I have, if you want to take part in this project, is to come out on the 28th so you can get that hands-on experience. Of June, yes, not May. We're gonna be out there unless it's thunderstorming. If it's raining, I don't mind getting a little bit wet, but due to safety concerns, if it is thunderstorming, we cannot go out. Yes, and if we live in good old Bloom County, so I am sure it's probably going to be raining. For people that are here in person, I do have a sign-up sheet over here if you know you want to come. For everyone that's attending virtually or watching this recording after the fact, it'll be posted on CCE's website, the registration form. Please do register if you do plan on coming, because I will send out a reminder email, and if we don't have your contact information, we can't tell you if we have to cancel it due to weather-related reasons. So are there any questions for me or for Chris, either on Zoom or in person? Yeah.
I have a suggestion on the 4-inch PVA.
Mhm.
Just try to stick, it's 4 inches,
Oh,
and then you can fold it up.
You,
That
sir,
probably would be close enough.
are a genius. Okay, so for people on Zoom who didn't hear, if you want to be quick and more efficient about it, you can just find a 4-inch diameter stick or dowel and bring it out to the field with you. So you have that as a point of reference. Because again, we're estimating here. Err on the side of caution though, like if you don't think it's 4 inches, don't include it. But again, you should be pretty good at visuals. Yeah, a piece of string or yarn too, that works. Whatever works for you guys.
If you wanted to do it by circumference, you'd have to what, multiply by that 4 inches by 5, but yeah.
So hold on a second. Diameter breast height is just, if I look at a tree,
Mhm.
actually I cut a tree, an ash tree on my property,
Mhm.
it was 32-inch PVA.
Mhm.
So that's now my floor in my living room.
Awesome.
Isn't it beautiful?
Yeah,
So that's just this.
yeah,
It's not this. So just a stick, 4 inches, if you held it up and you press height. It's simple. If it's bigger than that, you got to.
yes.
Is there software that allows you, let's say you have a plot of land,
Mhm.
to pinpoint where all your ash trees are on?
Yes, so some of the projects we were talking about, when you download them on your phone, it actually does GPS tracking. So you can actually see where you've already been, and when you are like, let's say I'm standing in front of an ash tree, if I'm collecting data on it, I could actually mark the location of the tree. That's really important, especially for the lingering ash search, because the people going out and making the scion cuttings need to be able to find the tree. So if you have cell service, you can just do it right on your phone. But if not, just you can record the coordinates. And without cell service, you should still be able to get like your coordinates using your phone.
What if your ash trees are not close together?
They don't need to be super close together. There just needs to be 4 in the area or 40 in the area of the plot, and that's just because of sample size. Like let's say there was only 10. The likelihood of one of them being a lingering ash is much lower. But yeah, so they don't need to be like right next to one another. But normally ashes tend to grow in pretty dense stands, so it shouldn't be too much of a concern.
So I have 55 acres of land, most of my ash, I think, is just, I have an 18-acre field,
Mhm.
and that's part of 55 acres. So the ash is kind of around the field,
Mhm.
but not in the deep woods. I don't think I see many ash.
Yeah, that's totally fine if they're on edge habitat. That's perfectly okay to use as long as they're naturally occurring and weren't planted. And yeah, if it's so if you have 20, that would be a great question for Jonathan. But what my understanding is you won't be able to set up a monitoring plot, but you can still monitor the trees without setting up a monitoring plot.
Great candidate for a RAMA.
That like 40 number is really important for the monitoring plots themselves. If you don't, you can still go out and do assessments like the MaMA Ramas, like Chris was saying. You don't need 40 for those. You can just be walking around and checking out ash trees while you're walking around.
Just if I could say this, Chris knows me, I think, well, if you're teaching about technology and what to do, if you could slow down for some of us.
Yeah, of course.
People are not good with technology.
Yeah. When we're out in the field, we're going to be doing all that. And if you are coming on the 28th, I would recommend downloading everything first. And when I send out that reminder email, I will include links to everything you should have downloaded. But when we're out there, we're going to be working through everything together. So you guys will be able to get experience and ask us questions on an as-need basis. Yes, Colin.
What if there's a ash tree that there are?
So if there's 100 ash trees and there's all of them are dead, obviously it's too late to look for lingering ashes. At that point, you can manage as you see best fit.
It's equally important to document it. It would be
Okay,
a
I just didn't
one-time
know it was
document.
Oh, yeah.
participate in-
Oh, no, if you have more than 40, that's fine. But you can still document that they are there and they are dead. So we know that the infestation has progressed to a point where we should be looking for lingering ashes in neighboring areas. Ava in the chat, where does the limit of surrounding ash trees end? So you just need to have 40 of them. Obviously, if it's a really, really big space, it might be a little bit hard to manage as a monitoring plot. But as long as there's 40 and like, there's no set like too big of an area. It's really what is within your means to be able to monitor efficiently. So that's kind of on an individual basis, but that's a good question.
Sure. Can you hear me through the Zoom?
Yes, I can.
So is there like a geographic area we should be focusing within too? So not up into Finger Lakes, not into Western New York?
So if anyone's watching this or doing work outside of the southern tier, you can do this anywhere. We're just focusing on the southern tier specifically because that's where most of us live, I assume, and the data is really lacking. But going back to the map, here, let me share my screen again and pull the map up.
Going north, towards Green, going up towards Syracuse, there's a lot of wide open space. But there's no reason not to set up a plot.
Yeah, so looking at this map again, anywhere where there aren't any colors, that's where we don't have any data collected at all. So you really want to be focusing there, whether or not it's in the southern tier or elsewhere. But if you look at the map and let's say you're in the Finger Lakes, you're already in space that has been surveyed. You can still go out and do mammoramas. You can still go out and look for lingering ashes if 95% mortality has been reached. But it's really the places where we don't have any data yet that we should be focusing on.
Looks like, I mean, it looks like you've already had a lot of data.
There's a good amount, but since the lingering ashes are so that are so rare, the more data, the better. Because the 95% mortality is just so we know the invasion has progressed to a certain point, but 95% mortality doesn't guarantee a lingering ash is going to be present. So like looking at all of this data that we have, we only found 110 lingering ash trees. So it really is covering as much area as possible to increase our chances of coming across a lingering ash.
And those green swaths aren't necessarily 100% from MaMA data.
Yeah, a lot of this data was populated from iNaturalist. So people that have been on iNaturalist and recorded an emerald ash borer, that's where some of this data came from too.
You'll see there are no points that denote plots anywhere between Elmira and Baker. So that's where we're trying to backstop the data where we say, okay, well, we know that EAB's been detected here, and we know based on those observations that it's been around for 4 to 7 years. And it certainly holds with my observations. But we need to fill in the gaps and fill in more details.
Any questions from folks on Zoom?
Yes, I'm still not clear in terms of plot size. So it's basically just 40 trees and it can be in 40 square feet or 400,000 square feet.
So like I was saying before, the actual geographic size of a plot, I don't believe there's any maximum on it. The important thing is just that you have 40 trees that you're identifying. The question becomes like, how big is too big for you to personally be able to monitor? So if you can personally go out and monitor a rather large area, that's totally fine. A lot of it just has to do with personal and individual ability to manage.
I think that's a big reason why the mature threshold was set at 4 inches DBH. If we were looking for 10 to 12 inch trees, 40 of them consistently, that's a tall order.
Yeah. And just to reiterate, like they have the 4 different projects, not all of them need that 40 DBH. So if that's something that maybe seems a little daunting or a bit overwhelming, MaMA is fine to do. The lingering ash search, if you know 95% mortality has been reached, is fine to do. And you don't need 40 trees for that. That's just as simple as if I'm on a walk in the woods, if I see ash trees, I can just pull out my phone, open up the app, and to record some data. So it can be very low commitment or as high commitment as you want. That's also the nice thing about the project is it can look different based on your individual circumstances and abilities.
What's the
So the app is going to be Anecdata. I will pull up a link and I'll email it out to everyone that is registered for the 28th. I'll make sure everyone has access to all of that information before the actual day of the event.
Yeah, it's blessed with one of those names that's terribly hard to remember. So we'll send out the reminders about it.
And Ava, to answer your question about a GIS layer, I believe Jonathan and Radka do have them, and also some of the projects that use the GIS, they should have a layer. I'm assuming you're asking because you do a lot of arbory work with your job. If you can't access it as a general member of the community, I can definitely reach out to Jonathan or Radka to see if I can get it for you. All right, any other questions? Yes.
How long station starts? How long does it take to reach 90?
It's roughly 8 years, give or take. In high abundance, it can be shorter. High abundance of the emerald ash borer, it can be shorter. But from the first sign of emerald ash borer's presence, it normally takes about 8 years to reach 95% mortality.
As long as in some way, shape, or form, any given tree has, 2 inches or so of cambium going all the way up to the ground, it can appear pretty healthy for quite a long time. That's why the 95%
I was
threshold
speaking
is
to a
there.
furniture maker in Mad Rapids over the weekend.
Mhm.
He hadn't even heard about it, and it's like, oh, my ants are healthy. What are you talking? Where is he? I know.
So
Is it not in the Adirondacks, or is he?
they're still on the move and they're progressing. I forget exactly where in the country they were introduced, but they came into Broome County almost 10 years ago now. And then every year their range slowly expands. Again, they're really, really small insects, so it takes a while for them to spread. Especially with how common ash trees are in our forests. They don't need to go that far in an individual year. But when I started going to BU almost 10 years ago now, I was taking Envi 101 and my professor pointed out all of the ash trees. And he told us by the time you graduate, all of these are going to be dead or dying. And I don't think any of us in the moment really took that to heart, but indeed he was right. 4 years later, all of our ash trees on campus were infested and actively dying. Not all of them, maybe there's lingering ashes. But yeah, I know BU took the strategy of cutting most of the ashes down just because of how well traveled by students the nature preserve is, just to eliminate safety hazards.
Introduced in Minnesota or Michigan and down 90 corridor.
Yes.
Okay.
If you think about how that Swan moves highway system,
Yes.
predominantly firewood and
Yeah, that's another important thing. Thank you for mentioning that. They get and travel around from firewood and things like that. A lot of our invasive pests can. That's why it's really important to not bring firewood with you. Always get your firewood locally sourced. And as far as the Adirondacks, the more isolated the ashes are, which means far from highways and things like that, the longer it's going to take for the borers to get there. Because they're getting there by natural spread of range. Instead of being moved around either intentionally or unintentionally by humans. So they'll get there, unfortunately. So the emerald ash borer specializes on ash species. They're native to Asia. The Asian ash species co-evolved with the ash borer, so they do have natural resistance to them. I guess we could open the can of worms of why don't we crossbreed them with the non-native species like the other projects are doing, but really keeping local genetics is preferred because then the trees are already adapted to the local conditions. When you start mixing in genomes of other species, there's a lot of things that go unaccounted for because there's millions of different genomes going on. So even inserting 1% of the genome of a non-native species has a lot of variables that we can't really control for.
Oftentimes you end up with a tree that is just kind of perpetually stressed, whether it be soil chemistry or climate or seasonality. There's just so much that can go wrong. If we see it in elm, if we see it in chestnut.
When you do that grafting, I'm just curious, you said you needed a root ball, but
Yeah, they take the twigs and then they basically graft it onto root tissue. And then since it's grafted from a mature tree, that's much more like the time you have to wait to be able to crossbreed them is a lot shorter than if you were growing from a seed.
the root ball and act.
Yes, yeah.
How does that work?
So the roots aren't really that impacted by the ash borer because they're going to be going after that above ground vascular tissue. And they aren't going to dig into the soil to go after the roots. So I'm pretty sure that's like where they're getting the roots from.
The thing that makes it resistant.
Is the top.
Yeah, the resistance is coming from the scion that's taken from the lingering trees. So even though they're being attached to roots from maybe not a lingering ash, all of the genetic material is going to be coming from that grafted scion twig. So like, it's kind of like getting a transplant organ. Like all the genetics are coming from that scion twig, even though it's being put onto the roots of a different individual tree.
They need roots, like I got all these little ash trees that gotta come out that in my foundation area.
I don't know. That's a good question. I'll ask Jonathan if they need to get roots from anywhere. Yeah, there's a hand somewhere over here.
Yeah. You mentioned that qualify as a lingering ash.
Mhm.
Crown of the completed pulp.
Yes,
At the same time, you said lingering ash also. done.
yes.
So how do you know whether you're looking at, if you see partially damaged ground? How do you know that's a lingering ash tree that's starting to go downhill or it's not?
You don't. That's why the timing is just so important here. That like really narrow window of once 95% mortality has been reached as quickly as possible as it's been reached is when you want to go out and look for the lingering ashes. Because once the lingering ashes start declining, we don't really have a way to reliably tell if it's a lingering ash or not.
That's the stage where it becomes bad, because if you think, well, what could have been there? Because yeah, is it dying because it's partially resistant and just overburdened? Or is it dying because it came late to the party and isn't resistant at all? In terms of the breeding program, they can't roll the dice.
So you have to test it anyway. If it's one of the 5% remaining, I would think that even if it has a little bit of deterioration, rather here on the side.
This is a good question for Jonathan, and is whether there's capacity for like genomic testing. If we do have an ash that is, say, like, 35 to 50% canopy in a 95% mortality area, it's not in good condition, but can we look at that and?
I'm sure that like
identify
there's like technology that could do that. I just think that like
But-
goes beyond the capacity of the project. One of the reasons that it relies so heavily on citizen science is the funding. Obviously, if you're doing this project, it's volunteered time for the citizen science aspect of the project. I wish they got paid for it. But I just don't think that's within the means or scope of the project, unfortunately, which is why the timing of it is so critical here.
Go take down $40 hours.
All right, if there's no more questions on Zoom, I will give it like 30 more seconds, but then I'm gonna go ahead and end the meeting. Thank you guys for coming. If you are on Zoom, keep an eye out for your emails. I'll be sending out the information to register for the 28th event at Waterman. And then I also will be sending out the Zoom recording. Feel free to share the recording with anyone you would like to. Good, valuable content. The goal of today was to get the word out to as many people as possible. So feel free to share, talk about it. We do not need to gatekeep this project.
Tell your friends.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you're saying this because basically for at least a couple of years, I've been hearing after you cut down.
That's the other important thing. A lot of people have lost hope.
I'm glad that you're doing it. This sounds like a particular approach to try to have this extended. It may or may not work.
Mhm.
We're kind of rolling the dice.
Did they cut them all on IBM Glen, or did they leave some?
We cut immediately adjacent to the trails at the IBM Glen as safety measure. It's we had to. There are still plenty of ash to be found. And this is, wow, I'm gonna do this. This is the one time that I really give blanket permission to go off the trails at any of our nature preserves. Because you'll have to, especially at the IBM plant.
Cause wasn't Jeff Smith's markings on the booth?
Jeff has been tracking phenology and trying to identify the presence of various native, biocontrol parasitoid wasps. But I mean, Jeff marks a lot of trees.
Before I end the Zoom, I did just want to touch upon that comment really quick. That's really important to note. A lot of people have kind of lost hope, just cut it down, because that has been the advertised practice. That's partly because MaMA was just trying to get proof of concept that this is working. And we know it's working. We have those second generation offspring from the crossbreeding project up at Cornell. They are showing natural resistance because of the crossbreeding. So it's an important project. We know that it's not like it was in the beginning, kind of rolling the dice. Is this crossbreeding going to work? But the crossbreeding is working, which is why now more than ever, it's really, really important to get this project out into the community, because right now common practice is cutting everything down.
That thing doesn't become forest.
I'm not sure. I know that the Botanical Gardens is managing the crossbreeding project. I don't know exactly the specific location. I would assume it's there though. All right, so folks on Zoom, I'm gonna end the meeting. Thank you guys for coming. Keep an eye out for emails. Thank you.
Curious today.